ventures to do. But then we find out that behind the tempest is who? Prospero, a powerful magician, steeped in his arts, very familiar as something like the reigning king. Right? Who it turns out is behind everything that we've seen. Who's controlling the whole tempest? For whom the tempest is just one way of getting back at his enemies and eventually restoring himself to his rightful throne. So, the moment of disruption and panic and chaos gives way to an organizing principle. And the organizing principle is represented by a semi-royal figure in his arcane knowledge. And if that's not enough, we then have an object demonstration of exactly how powerful Prospero really is. Because he schools his daughter. Okay? And we see from this, it's really, we see him manipulate the story. We see him put her to sleep when he wants her to sleep. We see him compel her to ask him the questions that he wants to be asked. We see that he's very successfully edited out her memory so she can barely remember anything of her previous life, except she says 5 or 6 women, which is interesting. In fact, he becomes not only the magician, not only the king, but now the master schoolmaster, right? And we see how extraordinary the extent of his domination is on the island. So, the Tempest in this way has a structure that's familiar to literary scholars from the Mask. We talked about the Mask at all? Yes, we did. Dr. Johnson's Mask. If you remember that, well, we talked about the Mask and the Anti-Mask. So that by 1610, Johnson had an innovator in court entertainment. And by the way, also, Shakespeare's later plays are kind of hard to position generically. He seems to be moving more and more towards the fantastic, and the influence of the court becomes more and more defined. And the court aesthetic seems to pervade these plays. So anyway, by 1610, Johnson, the innovator in the Mask, has already worked out in kind of tandem with James. I know some of you are working on this. In tandem with James, a symbolic structure by which order can be disorder can be accommodated and then subsumed under, a principle of order. So the Tempest seen from this light looks a lot like a royalist entertainment, not a colonialist entertainment, but a royalist entertainment, in which at first the anti-mask, exactly as in the structure of the mask entertainments themselves, the anti-mask shows up in the form of these belligerent commoners who refuse to acknowledge, due lordship and tell people to kiss their asses and so on and so forth, and who believe naively that they're in touch with a whole new world, who think that just because they left the confines of England, therefore the old structure doesn't apply anymore, and then they can actually tell that. So they're taught until the reassertion of order in the Mask, where we see that Prospero is behind the events. And Prospero remains behind the events of the play almost for the duration. Right? If you think about it, a lot of the play has to do with apparent challenges to Prospero's mastery that turn out not to add up to too much. And Caliban is one of those. So it's arguable that the reason Caliban is in the play is not to personify the oppressed colonized peoples, but he's in the play for the same reason that the boatswain most people are in the play. He's there to serve as basically the structural equivalent of the anti-mask. And so Caliban, and you know how it ends, right? Caliban apologizes for his rebellion, and Prospero famously says, "This thing of darkness I must acknowledge mine." Right? Which is to say, yes, there's a mask anti-mask structure. Yes, the mask must always include the anti-mask. I must acknowledge that mine as part of the dramatic structure by which the disorderly and rebellious and chaotic are folded back into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fair enough. Having said that, the play is really subtle in considering not only Prospero's magical mastery over the entire island, and apparently everyone on it, but there are all these, that's why the play is not reducible to that. There are all these kinds of moments in the play where Prospero's mastery seems to be breaking down. And people have made a lot of them. Like, for instance, Miranda's suggestion that there are 5 or 6 women that she can barely remember. And so there's a whole life that she's had to which she's tenuously attached. But it was a life before Prospero's mind control got hold of her. And then, of course, there's the way in which Caliban, despite being brutal and bestial, also manages to articulate very movingly the plight of his plight, as we saw last time. And there's that famous speech. And I've heard people describe how this is done in the theater in different ways, but when it's done right, it's just absolutely beautiful. So Prospero says, this is Act 3, Scene 2, around line 40. Excuse me, I'm talking about Caliban here. Caliban says, be not afeared, the isles full of noises, sound and sweet ears that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments go hung about my ears, and sometimes voices that if I had been waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches, ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. Those are perhaps the most beautiful lines in the play. Okay, so there's that. That's one of the ways in which Prospero's. But on the other hand, if you think about it, when Caliban describes those noises that he's hearing, what is he in fact hearing? Ariel, right? And so again, it's like there's a moment of something that seems to resist this overall structure. Like at this moment, with the pathos and dignity of Caliban's mourning, and his, a sense of unveils a sensibility of strength and respect. And then, yes, but then we see the operations of the magician behind all of it. And Caliban doesn't know that. So what he regards as some sort of something transcendent state is in fact nothing more or else than the effects of the operations of Prospero's magic and Ariel. There are other moments, like for instance, when the whole party is caught up in, they're caught up in watching first they're caught up in watching the mask. By the way, this is a play that includes a literal mask, remember? The travelers say, oh, and then the Gonzalo and the rest say, oh my, I'm extraordinarily splendid. In fact, the mask was occupied quite a bit of time on stage, so there's a key moment in the play, and would have been one of the spectacles that the play offered, just the way the court mask offered an enormous amount of spectacle. And Gonzalo and the rest are drawn into it, and they say things like, having seen this, I'll believe anything travelers tell me now, because the world outside England is so splendid and includes such tremendous wonders and so on. But of course, where's Prospero the whole time? Above, it says, the stage direction says he's above, which means he's up in the balcony. Right? You know, the same balcony they used for Romeo and Juliet. That's where Prospero would have been. So if the mask played itself out down on the stage, Prospero would have been above, and the magician slash dramatist slash, etc., creating the whole spectacle and directing it, just as he did the Tempest. So once again, you visualize would have been spectacle and then behind it some power at work. Nonetheless, after the mask dissipates, suddenly Prospero says, I had forgot. He's forgotten that Caliban is on his way and his revolt is ongoing. And so there's this crack there in Prospero's mastery. Up until that point, of course, Caliban thinks that he's been operating independently, but not. Everything he's doing has been known to Prospero. Then Prospero forgets. And then, of course, at the end of the play,